Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are here today to talk about values, culture, and sustainability. And I really want to talk about first what brought us here. What brought me here is that I'm a consultant and a speaker and a writer, and I specialize in values-driven leadership and cultural development. And I came to that because I was leading visionary dialogues with departmental leaders around the UN. And as I was listening to them, it kept occurring to me that the bottom line of pretty much everything that they were talking about came down to values. And so I started to explore what is a good methodology for working with values. And I found the Barrett cultural transformation tools. And it changed how I could work because I could do something that was data-based and values-driven and enabled us to really account for those values that were surfacing up as being so important. And it also provided a way it sort of anchored my own passion for transformation. My life is about helping support transformation. And it's a pretty obscure idea, but when I found out about the role of values in the building of cultures and what happens in the role of values in making things happen, that just really changed my life, and it changed my perspective on working in that field and working on leadership, working on success in general. So our intention today is to really open up the space for a very deep dive into how values impact the Sustainable Development Goals, from such a large global aspiration right down to how they impact our everyday moment-to-moment lives. And we want to also connect the dots between those two things, between the personal and the global. And we're doing this on the One World Town Hall during One World Unity Week. And the focus of the One World Town Hall is to look at where inspiration meets needs. And so that's what we want to do. We want to really connect the dots between the metaphysical, the inspiring, those things that we can't put our fingers on but that drive our actions and our desires. And we want to connect those with policy and with things on the ground. And that's what values do. Values are the connectors between those two things. So, and values also help us access our consciousness. And at the end of the day, when I look at those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I see the spaces in between them, because it's that area of consciousness that lies in, of, between, and through the Sustainable Development Goals that's really going to make the difference of whether we realize those goals or not. And again, values are a means to access that domain of consciousness. And that is the domain where the work goes, because we can't make enough laws or projects to do the work right now. We need a consciousness shift. My colleagues and I do not have the answers, but we have some experience and stories that we want to tell. And so we welcome you. And I pass this on to Tor.
Thank you, and welcome also, Irene. I see that you're coming in here. Thank you very much, Joni, for that lovely introduction. We will like to have a short video to share as an introduction to us and also to the conversation that we will have during this hour. So we will start with a short video. It's 6 minutes, so be with me, and hopefully the sound is a little low in the beginning, but it will get better as we go. So here we go. Let's see if we can get to that. That's not the picture that I would like to have. This is the one. So I hope that you now can see the Nappermoon story. Sustainable well-being starts within. Is that correct, Paul?
Yes.
So here we go. Let's listen to what Phil has to tell us.
Hello. This is a story that connects human values, culture, and consciousness to personal, societal, and even planetary healing, sustainability, and well-being. Before we get to the story, I'd like to start with this quote from Gus Speth. And it says, "We scientists don't know how to do that. I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. I want to start with the picture of the bee and the flower, because this is one of the most basic pictures of coexistence. And without this relationship, human beings wouldn't be able to exist either. Now we take a bigger picture and we look at the expression of humanity's needs at this moment in history, and that can really be found within the UN Sustainable Development Goals. If we look at how many organizations are trying to address this is being done through science and technology and agriculture and manufacturing, and all of those things are necessary. But as Gus Speth rightly said, there has to be something more, there has to be something deeper. And so what would that more and deeper be? Here's one possible approach to that. If we look at who's delivering those goals, it's organizations. And the culture of those organizations really matters. How sustainable is that culture? How caring is that culture of their people? How much do they focus on the well-being of their people? Because their well-being will have an impact on the ability for them to do their jobs and make a bigger difference. But even beneath that, it's for all of us individually, and particularly our leaders. What are the choices we're making around our own development, our own consciousness, facing our own inner fears and our own well-being? Because that provides a foundation for everything else. Our doing flows through our being, and our being comes from the time we're investing in our own development. And so what we can say is the foundation of organizational sustainability is personal sustainability. And we have the brilliant framework from Richard Barrett, which helps us to measure both personal, organizational, and even societal culture and values. And if we go on from there, the foundation of societal sustainability is organizational sustainability. So once again, we can see that all these things are connected. Now let's tell you a real story of how this works. So I want to introduce you now to, on the left is Marianne Coconut from the Napranum community, and they are based in northern Queensland in Australia. And on the right is Annalise Jennings, who's a wonderful facilitator of transformation living in Melbourne, Australia. Now, many things connect Marianne and Annalise, but one thing in particular relative to this story is the fact that they've both done much of their own inner work. And as this story unfolds, you'll see that it is their doing that flows from their being that really was the center of the possibility of transformation in this community. The Napranum community had been subject to over 100 years of really inappropriate government intervention, and this had created enormous challenges within the community. So there were high levels of drug addiction and alcoholism and family violence and joblessness and a deep sense of hopelessness within the community. Annalise met with Marianne and community leaders and the community and started to explore not how Annalise could tell them how to fix themselves, but how they could start their own process of healing and transformation. And this started with a values assessment that looked at who were the people within the community, what were their personal values, what was most important to them, how they experienced their current culture, what was working well, but also was what was undermining quality of life. And then the desired culture, what they needed and desired in order to create true well-being and a new sense of transformed sustainability. This is a picture of one of the workshops that Annalise facilitated. And the short version of the story is that over the course of 3 years, the community truly did transform itself, and we saw incredible statistics of transformation, such as a 60% increase in unemployment, an 80% reduction in children attending the Safe House, and the physical construction of homes and libraries and shops to support the needs of the people. What was amazing about this is we could see the positive impact on all of these sustainable development goals, and they'd shifted the needle at a community level, but made a contribution at a planetary level through the changes they had made. And this came, once again, from the inner being of the leaders, encouraging the growth of the inner being of all their people so that they could create their own transformation. So I want to remind you again here that the foundation of organizational sustainability is personal sustainability. Who Annalise and Marianne and who we are and how we show up really does make a difference to our organizations and our teams. And our organizations and teams how healthy they are, and the well-being that we experience inside of those teams makes a huge difference in our ability to deliver on the planetary needs for sustainability at this moment. Together with brilliant consultants like Annalise, Paul, Joni, Tor, and Phil are supporting leaders of organizations, governments, communities, and even whole nations to create healthier and more sustainable futures focused on well-being for all.
That was an introduction by my colleague Phil Clothier, who would love to be here, but he is not able to join us. So we made a recording, which I think summarizes very much of the essence of the message that we would like to talk about and explore more together now. And just a little bit about ourselves. Why don't you give an introduction to yourself as well, Paul? We listened to Joni's lovely introduction. What would be your introduction, Paul?
Thanks, Thor. Well, maybe short introduction. I'd say the first 30 years of my life, I was an engineer. So I tried to measure everything. What couldn't be measured didn't exist. But always had some issues on a relational level with bosses, colleagues. And at some point they asked me to become a team leader, and first tried to do that according to the laws of physics. But then within a few weeks, some people started complaining in the team, and I tried to put that on them first for about a week. But then thought, well, it can't just be them, and it can't be just all my bosses. So I tried. I went on a well, maybe as Joni says, a path of transformation to find the answer, but not anymore outside. Went in to look inside, looked in the mirror, found a lot of stuff, things I liked, things I didn't like, and for the last 20 years, we've been with some wonderful colleagues facilitating transformation processes in very diverse organizations, from small schools to voluntary sports clubs to industrial companies to platforms in the North Sea, humanitarian organizations, you name it, and all. In our previous meeting, we talked a little bit about this also, but the underlying patterns are universal. The language may be different, the national culture may be different, but the underlying pattern is all about needs, what people need. And for me, the journey was first about my needs, and now trying to make it about our collective needs. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. If I should say a little bit about Phil, who is not here, but he is really here in spirit with us, is that, well, Phil and I met because we both worked for Barrett Value Center for many years, and Phil used to be the CEO of the company. And that has given us an opportunity to work with numbers of organizations around the world to help them become more conscious about what are the values that are important and how do we express and live those values in our daily life in order to free the full potential. But lately also, it became also very clear to us during the last years here that the sustainability goals is depending very much on this consciousness about our values and be able to live those values. And if we are not able to do that, we are going to live and make decisions of something we will call maybe unconscious or even subconscious needs that we have as human beings. So it's really a journey around the globe that we have had together to explore how can we become more conscious about our needs and take more profound, deeper, more I would say values that drives for the more common good rather only for my own self-interest. That could be a good summary. If I say a few words about myself, it's actually fairly similar to Paul. I worked for almost 20 years or 15 years at least as a culture manager inside of organization, and my job has been has been very much focused on how I make this intangible world tangible through different ways, which is really coming through inviting us to dialogues where we become more conscious about who we are, what we would like to achieve. And I also believe that in the systems and structures in the beginning, but started to realize that that's more, more something to anchor and make sure that it's working, rather than something that is prerequisite to make it work. So values is really the starting point. I think I leave it with that as personal introductions, and why don't I leave it over to you, Joni, to take us on a journey on exploration regarding how our inner life actually has an impact on sustainability.
Howard, I think, Paul, you were going to cover that. I'm going to cover the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, why don't
I'll start with a story. So some years ago, in the aftermath of the economic crisis, I was asked to talk to a group of shift managers in Greece of a power plant, and it was a very small group, about 6 people. And the cause of that, the reason for the conversation was safety culture, their personal physical safety. But the actual underlying thing was, how can we, as a group, become more responsible for ourselves, our people, and what this power plant is doing. And of course, back then was also the beginning of the energy transition that was also starting. I didn't know these people before, so the first question after a short introductions is usually, why do you come to work? And obviously they hadn't thought about that question too often, because after the question was a big silence. And so the first obvious answer was, because we get paid, because we receive a salary every month. And then in the aftermath of the economic crisis, in Greece, having a job was already, then you're not in the majority. Unemployment was huge. So if you have a job, you don't think about it too much. But then the question, so what does that salary enable you to do? And they started thinking, and they started sharing. They could buy food for their families. They could have a house. They could pay for the education of their kids. So the first step was that they started to realize what that salary, that monthly number on the bank account, was actually facilitating them to do in their lives. Now the next question, again, so why do you do this job then? Why do you come here? And that was even a harder question. Someone answered in Greece, colleague translated, and basically the answer was, I come to do this job because I went here yesterday. And nothing more. And at the moment he said it, he also realized the absolute, it wasn't that he didn't care. I mean, these people are very passionate and they love their work, but they just didn't think about it. And so that started a conversation about what is our role here as shift leaders working 24/7 in a power plant in the beginning of the energy transition, and how their role, how they could play a role in that, how they were even playing a role in that without realizing it. And the thing is, they left that meeting, was just half a day, left the meeting with a totally different understanding and feeling about their work. They started reaching out to peers in their, because this was a large company with about 30 power plants, they started reaching out to peers on how were they making a difference in the energy transition. And they started realizing that this work actually fulfilled, let's say, dormant or sleeping needs that they didn't realize they had. And it was, for me, it was an amazing conversation just to be in the openness of people realizing something like that. And they left that meeting with, this is a conversation, some people were there already for 25 years, with remarks like, I haven't had a conversation like this about my work in all my career. So at the level of purpose, that was very, for me and for them, a mutual, very inspiring conversation. Maybe Tor, you want to comment on how this relates to values and needs?
Yeah, I can give a connect to it in the fact of why is values so valuable, and why does the consciousness about your values play such a role? And I think that's what you are indirectly are actually saying, that you are living your life without really connecting to what really matters to you, so to speak, or maybe even not even recognizing how you make a contribution to the world that you are part of. But with the mere fact of asking the right questions, you become more conscious about those, and you can make a difference for yourself and for the people around you. So, and value is an expression of our needs. And what you got as a first answer was, I need to have money so I can have food on the table. But then I started to read that I also would like to be a contributor to the world that I'm part of, in the community that I'm living in. But then it expands as well as you live and as you become more conscious. So by actively working with your values, you also become more conscious about your needs, of course, but also what kind of behaviors, and as Phil was saying, how you act and what actions you will take. And those actions won't happen unless you are becoming conscious about them. So that's what I would kind of build upon regarding that. And if I were to talk about it from a values and culture perspective, what you are illustrating is really the individual, the importance of the individual connection, consciousness about your own values. But there's also a collective consciousness that emerges, which values is an expression of what are the values that we hold together when we are working together. And that is the collective needs of us as a group. And that's also unconscious in many cases. And when you become more conscious about that, you can make even more profound differences for the world that you are part of by becoming conscious about the values that we would like to hold together. But there is something here as well that I'd like to connect as well. And that is that there is this unconscious side. We are wired as human beings in the way that we are always scanning the world to what we have learned is the way for us to survive without having a risk to have any pain or getting hurt, so to speak, or so we are making sure that we make decisions that are going to be good for us. And that is very much of an unconscious and very quick. There are two different systems, the fast and the slow system. And this is, the fast system is actually dominating most of our decisions in our daily work. And most of those are based on our history and our belief system and where we are grown up, and also what we are conscious about, so to speak, from before. Making a values-based decision is actually the slow system, where you slow down and consciously think about what is the effect about this, what is happening. And this is connecting to Joni's comment regarding how we make policy decisions or how do we create the policies. It has to have a conscious slow down, so to speak, in order to make it really profound and values-based. Because I personally believe that all policies today are values-based, but the key question is, are they consciously values-based? We may be taking decisions on our unconscious beliefs that we would like to manifest in those policies. And the key thing is to become conscious about it. And I think your story, Paul, actually illustrate with the simplicity of how you actually ask the right questions to unfold that and to listen to that and become conscious about that individually and then also collectively, so to speak.
Maybe to illustrate the slow and the fast system, maybe people recognize that sometimes you respond in a certain way very quick, and then a few seconds later you think, well, that may not have been the wisest response. That's exactly the difference between the fast and the slow system in your head.
Yeah, I mean, from a scientific perspective, the neocortex, which is the more logic brain, so to speak, where we have most of that slower capability, that kicks in about 5 to 6 seconds after the event that is happening. And so we respond more from the amygdala and hippocampus part of our brain without connecting to the deeper understanding of what we think is important. And that's why we need to become more conscious about our values.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something you said about reevaluating our values. And I think that's really the work of transformation, is a revaluation of values. So to find true valuation for contribution. Because Paul, I think those clients wouldn't have been in that place if the culture valued contribution in real accurate proportion to how important it is to people. And if we supported contribution, if we supported relationships, if our valuations, if our economic valuations and our social valuations placed contribution, relationships, the things that really matter the most to people, if they placed those as the central core that determined policy and practice, then then we get the better world. And it really does come down to the cultural context. And values build the culture. The individual values and the collective values come together to build the culture. And that's really what it takes. If we want to build the culture that will sustain a sustainable world, that will fulfill on the Sustainable Development Goals, then we need to be conscious of the culture that we're creating, because culture is like a lab dish. It'll grow some things and it won't grow other things. And if we're going to have the world that we want, we need to create the culture that will support that. So that to me is the work with the Sustainable Development Goals, is to move more deeply into the realm of consciousness, into the realm of what is it, what's the context that these goals are or are not occurring within. And how do we account for that context so that it can't help but generate peace, relationship, connectedness. That's the world we need to build, is the world that actually will nurture the way we want to live.
If I were to also pick up something on your story, Paul, and that is you said that you realized in your work that we are very much alike. I have the same experience. I work around the whole globe in all parts, all continents, and I come to realize that we are so alike as human beings because our needs and our psychological development is very, very similar. And that's the dimension that I'd like to bring in here, because it could be easy to say, well, just because you need to become more aware of your values, but you could also have with you that we are developing and growing in a very similar pattern. We have our basic needs that we need to satisfy or find ways to feel at ease to have met, so to speak, those needs, survive, relate, and being valuable, so to speak. These are basic needs. But we also have a need to transform and develop and grow and so on. And then we have to let go of some of those addictions that we have, or not addiction, but those connections that we have to our basic needs. And once we have felt more of the question, who am I in this world, so to speak, and what I would like, then we start to, what is my unique gift? What is the thing that makes me tick, so to speak? What I would like to contribute? What am I here to contribute with? What is the spark in my life that I'd like to share with the rest of the world, so to speak? And we spend time on identifying that, and that changes our values and priorities as well. But then we also might come into the next stage, which is very much from a psychological point, when we reach out and connect with people who are sharing very much of the same type of values. Even later on, maybe we come to a stage where we say, well, I would like to be of service. I would like to give back. We are all connected in this world, and we need to take a bigger responsibility. And so our values change again. And why I bring that up is to build on what Joni was saying, that we become aware of our values is one thing, but also becoming aware of our evolution of from a psychological point is very, very important in order to understand why I value some values before other values, so to speak. So the model that you see here on the screen with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is just for those who haven't seen it, it has this pyramid at the bottom, which is really Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which goes up to 4 and 5, which is more the self actualization that Maslow was talking about. But what Richard Barrett, when in his model, what he did, he actually added also the more, and then he used the Vedic system, which is the chakra system as well, combining those two, where you have level 6, which is more of, giving the energy, giving back to the community around you, and giving back to the world, being part of the world, and unity for all, so to speak. And what we do is that we measure the culture by putting our values in relation to this model, and then we can see where energetically do we have our focus. And by that, we can start from where you are from a values perspective, but also from a psychological, individual and collective development perspective.
David, I think you had a question. Do you want to ask that now?
Sure, thank you very much. And absolutely, values determine, everything. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts, because what I'm hearing is that you help report out or help people, be aware of their values and conscious of their values and the play of them. Do you have thoughts as to the forces that are at play to influence values, to change values, either to the more positive or to the negative? I mean, just look at the world at large, but I'll just talk about, in the United States, the dynamics that have been taking place and this great divide that we have, and, politically and culturally, and the quote culture wars and so on. What do you see impacts values or helps to shift values, one way or the other? So your thoughts about that.
Wonderful
and do you
question.
see yourself in the realm of helping to shift values, or you're just helping to discover them?
Do you want to answer that, Paul, or should I go?
That's of course that's always the question. Am I assisting in shifting values? I don't know. What I do know, in that situation in Greece, those people became aware of something that they had forgotten. And by becoming aware, they started to make different choices. They started to make choices in order to consciously shape their contribution in the energy transition. Before that, they may have been a bit scared of entering that domain and feeling this, I have a job, so that's tick the box, taken care of. I don't want to risk that. So, and I'd say at max that we are facilitating people to reprioritize their values. Mm. And for example, a very simple question that anyone can answer themselves is, do you feel that there are enough resources in the world to feed humanity? And we can answer that from a rational perspective, but do I actually feel that we have enough? And if that need needs to be met, I need to feel that there's enough, that the world provides with my basic needs. If I don't feel that's enough, I'll start trying to meet that need. In the beginning of the COVID crisis, people started hoarding. Mm-hmm. And there was plenty, at least in this part of the world. very fortunate about that. But so a couple of years ago, there was a study done where they asked people of many countries, how much money do you earn and how much would you need to have enough? So people gave their number and then they all said twice as much, which is very fascinating. Regardless of how much money they make, we need twice as much. And that's a very simple thing that drives a lot of people's behavior. What's enough? When I was about 25, the biggest challenge with the annual appraisals was to say to the offer, that doesn't really meet my needs. And then you got more. But no standards, no norms, no.
Just
Sorry,
more.
you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'd like to. Oh, yeah, Johnny.
In response to your question about moving to more positive levels, one of the things that we measure is aspirational values. So as what are the values that people want to live out? We do their personal values, the current organizational values of or country or city, whatever we're measuring, and then what are the aspirational values? So that's an authentic, then they generate how they want to go forward. And the human spirit is that it always wants to evolve and do better. And so the aspirational values are a way to articulate that. And then you can measure later, did we come to our aspirational values? Did we fulfill our aspirational values? And what are they now? And so there's an authentic line and of momentum, because again, values are our most primal drivers. And so when you have these aspirational values, and especially when you work with an entire organization to come into coherence about those aspirations, then the values themselves are the generators of the evolutionary movement toward, a higher level of functionality. Tor?
And building on that, the story that Phil was sharing from the Napperman community, you could see the personal values, who they are as human beings, what their needs are at this current moment, and then related energetically to the 7 levels, but also how many and what kind of values they had. Many relationship type of values like family, caring, respect. But when they came to the situation where they are part of, it was not that much of relationship values. If there were, the majority of them and actually were relationship values that are not serving them or not meeting their needs, so to speak. And what they were asking for is more this fairness, honesty, empowerment, and open communication, shared value, shared vision. So your question, David, do you, because your question is very, very good, you have to think about the context that you're in. But in this case, they were creating their own community, they lost their ownership of their own destiny, so to speak. I mean, I don't want to answer the question and say, yes, we can change your values, because we can't. What we can do is to bring you to the attention and become conscious about what is going on right now and where do you want to go in order to be more well-being or well-off, whatever that is that you have as an ambition. So it is more of inviting to dance and being able to have a conversation about what do we have today? What is that we would like to go away from? And what is it that we would like to see more of? So yes, we know by experience that we can transform cultures. And this is an example where that was done in a very beautiful way. But we also know that we have to be very aware of that we don't change your, David, I'm not going to be able to change your values. You do that. But I can have a conversation with you to maybe evolve and get the different perspective. It may not resonate. I mean, Paul has some questions that you have been working with, similar to what we have been working, but it's more of your choice, your own choice. If I'm going to be in that situation or not, or want to explore in that. Paul, you are about to say something, it looks like it.
Yeah, there's always things coming up.
Mm-hmm.
One thing is that sometimes I do the same as you do. At the beginning of a workshop, I'll say, today, I'm going to change your behavior forever. And then they all start laughing. and they say, you need more help, you're crazy, and I'll leave, etc. So then we get that off the table. But then the second thing that I have to let go of is that my need to make people believe my truth. So I do ask questions, but I have no idea what they're going to realize or have as insights. I'm just aiming to create a space where something new can come up, which they didn't know or had forgotten, and I didn't know. And too often, even I also have to be on my own balcony to be mindful of that. I'm not trying to convince someone to believe me.
Here's an interesting, that's something we would like to convey during this hour as well. If we take this, we had a conversation with a dear colleague at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Wendy Van Tool in Holland. And she asked us a question, is it possible to connect our values to the 17 sustainability goals? Is it possible to use values to become more conscious about how sustainable we are as an organization? And that is a request that she got from her clients around the world, or specifically in the area that we share as you operate. And that started Phil and I to start to see, is it possible? And we came very quickly to the conclusion, it's not possible to connect our values specifically to any of the 17 goals. But then we also looked into how do we organize those values or those 17 goals. And they are organized in something called the 5 Ps, which is people, prosperity, peace, partnership, and planet. Yes, thank you. And by organizing the values according to those, we were then able to see that actually make it very possible to connect our values to the 17 goals. So what we are able to do is to measure. Now I'm coming to your question regarding, could you change the context in which you are? Yeah, here's the UN and Wayne Wisser actually created that societal definition of the 5 Ps, ending poverty and hunger, and ensure that all human beings can fulfill their basic needs and reach their potential. That was but it's quite big. Well, how does that look like from an organizational perspective? And how does that look like from an individual perspective? And those were the sentences that we used then to describe or connect the values to the 17 sustainability goals. And what we then are able to do is to show a picture, how far away are you in your reality from the sustainability goals, or how sustainable are you as individuals or as an organization? And by that, we provide a possibility to see ourselves in our current reality and recognize, hey, we have very little focus on peace, or hey, we have a lot of focus on prosperity, but not so much on partnership. And that is then providing a segue or a possibility for you to start, what can we do differently, and how can we make much more of a balanced distribution of our values?
I think the other thing that's really important with the measuring is that so much happens on assumptions, or just on format. You know, consultants come in and they do what they do, right? It's not based in what the container actually is, what the culture actually is. And then a lot of work happens around, well, of course we all want clean water. Of course we don't want poverty. Of course we don't, you know, and so there are all these assumptions that everybody's at the table with the same ideas. And especially around the United Nations, where there's multilateral work going on, that's very dangerous, because you have very different cultures at the table. The table itself has its own culture. And people are assuming what their constituents want. They're assuming what their multilateral partners want. They're conjecturing, because they're not using tools like the Barrett tools to actually get the data and situate the conversation and what's so for the people who are involved in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe,
Paul.
Joni, a question to add to that is, how does that then relate to policy making?
Yeah, you know, policy making, again, there's a lot of conjecture. A lot of it gets made around who's got the power to pull what. A lot of it gets made around, this is the way we've always done it. A lot of it gets made around assumptions. We assume people want this. We assume we should do that. So when this is really what drives me to work with this work is it's very rarely truly anchored in what's so for people. We don't take the time to account. You know, the UN is very much an organization based on principles. The principles, the charter is gorgeous. But then there's they don't use a system of accountability to account for the very primary objectives of what they're in business to do. And so it's in applying this kind of work that you can actually help them account for the mission that they're on, you know, no matter what kind of organization it is, because it used to be this delusion, you've got to handle the money first, and then then you can start to think about these greater good conversations. And, you know, all the data that's come in through Barrett has proven that that's just nonsense. And at the UN, where it's not about the money, you know, it's not really a monetized culture, even though a lot of money flows around it. But, you know, it's not about the money, but there still is these underlying assumptions, mostly based on Western acculturations, because they're the ones who have the power to keep making these policies. So that's why there's so much focus right now on getting the voices of civil society into the mix. And yet, when you do all of this polling and you get this cacophony of civil society weighing in, how do you delineate that into what people really want to do? What's the difference between what people in Asia want to do as opposed to what people in Africa want to do, as opposed to what the world needs, you know? And that's what I love about Barrett is we can look at any slice. We can look at the private sector with the same coherent data set. We can look at people, individuals with the same coherent data set. We can look at a whole country or the whole United Nations. And so when we get that consistency across the board and we actually have measuring tools to work with, then it raises up the starting place. It means we're not conjecturing about what needs to be done. It means we're not just coming in with the best new tool we know. It means we're coming in with what's really true for people, according to them.
I mean, in the beginning, this Barrett analytic model actually was called the 7 levels of consciousness. And it's an evolutionary model where you become conscious about your values and also about the values that you don't value at the moment.
About the ones you want to live out.
But the ones that you would like to live out. And you are able to see it from an individual personal perspective, but also from a collective contextual right now. And as you're saying, Joni, also that what are we desiring? What's the aspirational values that we would like to see, and how do we manifest those? Which brings into another aspect that is very fundamental in the work that we do, and part of the question that you asked, David, is to invite into dialogue. And dialogue meaning co-creative dialogue, where the community, the people who are in that group that we are working with, and that may be a nation, community, an organization, or a small group, it doesn't really matter. There are different ways on how you invite into dialogue, but it's in the dialogue that the consciousness and awareness, or it goes from awareness to consciousness. I'd like to manifest this. I'd like to act in this way instead. And that's where the transformation happens as well in the conversation.
And that's what we're doing in this room all week. The One World Town Hall is bringing in the role of consciousness. It so rarely gets its due attention, because it is causal of everything. Consciousness comes first before anything else happens. And so when you account at the level of consciousness and develop consciousness consciously, then, you know, that's the work right now. That's the work.
I'm looking at time and knowing that we have 9 minutes to go. Is there anyone, I'm now looking at you, Joni, and asking, is there any possibility to see if there are any questions that has come up from the Facebook community, or is it something that, because we or Kara, who is online. Maybe you have a question here as well. David, you had one, maybe you have more, but I want to give the possibility also to explore if there are questions that needs to be addressed, and give space for that.
We have none on Facebook.
Okay.
You know,
So,
if there are no questions, I'd like to talk a little bit about culture of peace. Because, and David, I know we could start the hour right now all over again with you just speaking on that. But when you guys were developing the SDG tools, toward the end of that, we started working with Phil on using the Barrett tools to measure culture of peace, because the UN has a mandate to build a culture of peace. And there's high-level meetings, there's, the Secretary General is accountable for reporting on the development of that. And so now we can include indicators in the Barrett tools for indicating how the culture of peace values are being lived out or aspired to or compromised. And we did that with a lot of work with Nonviolence International, and we went through the Culture of Peace Declaration and pulled the values from there. So then Richard worked with us too to delineate within the system. So it gives us a way, because it's so aspirational, but again, that culture of peace work is often feels ungrounded, even with the best intentions and people working really hard, and there's no accountability system in place to keep measuring, keep saying, how are we doing exactly? Where is the consciousness in terms of manifesting culture of peace?
But I have something to share if you want.
Sure.
Go ahead. Well, I would just say that very definitely. So the working with Pathways to Peace since 1980, and then with the culture of peace at the United Nations, the 8 action areas, and with Ambassador Chaudhry and coming here to Ashland, and we founded the Ashland Culture of Peace Commission. And it was to work with the city and the community around bringing forward the whole awareness of different action areas of the culture of peace. And what I found is we've had some significant impact through different projects and actions, but it's just long term. It's long term. It's being consistently present. It's holding the values of that. It's how we function with complete integrity at all times. But we have had a significant impact on this community over time. Part of that is working with the police department and bringing in the program of Police to Peace, which was a major influence in this community and the police, and now it's a major influence within the Pacific Northwest because of what we did. And anyhow, there's a lot of things that go on because we're short on time, but it is possible, but it just takes time and being consistent and having an influence in that way. So in terms of measurability, we didn't use an index per se with the city at large, but we can point to different activities that have had a positive impact over time.
We have our next panel starting to come in, and I asked you guys to be a little patient. We're going to be finishing this one up in a bit, and we'll start right at 3 o'clock.
Yeah. Something that comes to my mind when I'm hearing this, David, transformation takes time, that we all know that, but it takes time because with people, fast is actually slow and slow is fast. So you need to slow down in order to be able to. But that's one thing. The other thing that comes to my mind is more of knowing that or being aware of that we also are living in different worldviews. We have a perception of how the world is functioning, and that determines how we interpret the values. So if you have the list of values, for example, for peace, they are written from the worldview that you, David, and your colleagues have when you define those values. But it may not be the same understanding for somebody who is living in a different type of worldview. And that's the difficulty with when you have a predefined list of what are these values. And that's why we think it is important also to combine it with this co-creative transformational dialogue, where you invite people to get a shared understanding. What do we mean by these different things?
Right.
I'm going to ask just Paul and Tor to give a 1-minute wrap up so we can start transitioning to our next group.
Well, wrap up. Maybe something to build on David's story about it's a long-term thing. If Laurie Santos's work on the science of well-being is very fascinating, because she says that we are actually hardwired, if we look for short-term happiness, to look at the things that are not making us very happy, like a new car, a bigger salary, and high grades at university. And the more long-term things, like sleeping well, taking care of your health, contributing to something better, relating to others, do make us more happy long-term. So that for me is very congruent with what you're saying in the approach that you're taking. And then to summarize, for me, the journey is about how can I shift from meeting my needs, my individual needs, whilst not harming others, and how can I contribute to meeting our collective needs. That would be my summary. And then values and Richard Barrett's approach and the value center approach is for me a very structured way of making the implicit explicit and the intangible tangible, so that we have something common to talk about. I mean, across different cultures, it's hard enough, and languages. So this gives us a very basic structure in loads of languages to create mutual understanding.
Thank you. Tor, very quickly, we're really at the end here.
Yeah, very quickly, I would add, I mean, I completely align with what Paul was saying. And if there is something I'd like to add is that we have this saying that beliefs, what you believe is the right thing, has a tendency to divide us, where values, when we are sharing and talking about values, actually unite us. So beliefs divide, values unite. And that would probably be my last minute summary, so to speak.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm just thrilled to have had this panel.